So that's where I'm going to stop and see where you want to go with this conversation now.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
One thing I try in class with students, a lot of times they see a dichotomy between victims on one side, offenders on the other, good guys and bad guys.
Yeah.
And always tried to get people to understand that the offenders are oftentimes victims themselves of a whole host of things, everything, mental illness, abuse, addiction, etc. How do you think we could promote that a little more without being called, left-wing wackos and things like that?
Well, it's true. Well, many offenders have been really victimized themselves, traumatized. Many, even if they haven't, think they have. I think a lot of offending is a response to either a victimization or a perceived victimization on the part of offenders. And if you don't address that with them, you're not going to get very far. So that's one point. It's very hard for people who've been victimized to hear that. Well, the thing I find works better is to talk about trauma. Trauma that's unaddressed is reenacted. I mean, if you're traumatized and you don't address that, it's going to end up affecting your life, it's going to affect your family's life, and it's going to affect future generations. A lot of offending behavior is a reenactment of trauma that people have experienced. I find it, people, particularly who've been victimized, find it easier to think in terms of trauma because they've experienced trauma themselves than to talk about offenders as victims. I don't know if that helps, but that's one way I've worked at it. In my book Transcending, which was interviews with people who had experienced really severe crime, a number of them described circumstances that were leading them on a path to becoming offending as a result of their victimization. In our STAR program, where we train people in how trauma affects us personally, but also communities, and various strategies for addressing it as both individuals and communities, we talk about the victim-perpetrator cycle. We have this diagram. We show how the cycle people get into as victims, and if they don't break out of it, they're likely to become perpetrators. That's a long and circuitous answer. Oh, I got to use that word again. But I found that language of trauma is easier for people than victimization. But I do think that a lot of offending behavior is a response to a real or perceived victimization. And what I have found in working with offenders who've done serious crime is that I have to often start by having them get in touch with the time when they themselves were victimized, and then honoring the parts of it that need to be honored and challenge them on times that don't. But it's when they begin to get in touch with that they begin to connect with the harm that they've done.